Well, it's John Black, Super Chemist. Here on this video, I transitioned my child. I regret it. The video's on YouTube channel is called Trigonometry. So let's get into it.
And so after a period of years, we came to this: neither of our sons is innately transgender. I want to say this clearly. When we came to that decision, I still didn't see it as a belief system. I was still in it. But I had come painstakingly, both of us had, to the conclusion that that our sons weren't actually trans, that it was something else for both of them, and we were clear in that. This belief system, the heart of it, says that children should lead. And it's contradictory, because once children say they are the opposite sex, then adults lead them to gender affirmation, okay? To concretizing that cross-sex identity and medicalizing it. But what I realized in those 2+ years of anguish was that I had led my child into it. And therefore I must lead him out of it. It is my responsibility. And like a second later, I'm on my phone, I'm texting a friend, I'm like, we've realized that our older son is not actually transgender. We're going to be rolling back the social transition. And I feel like I am leaving a cult. Because that's what it felt like to me. He said to me, "Mama, this is your fault. You changed my name." So imagine had we not realized our mistake, and you go 10, 20 years into the future. Imagine that, "Mama, this was your fault then." My name is Rose. I live in the United States, and I would say the big picture of my life is that, I, like everybody else, so just trying to figure out how to live a good life, and my own path that kind of really led me into being very involved with social justice as a young person, and then coming into motherhood, and how those beliefs and those views kind of shaped some of the approaches that I took to raising my sons. And that's what I wrote my piece about in the context of this phenomenon that we call gender ideology. And that's what I'm here to talk about today.
Yeah, well, you wrote a piece on Substack, which we'll put in the link for people to read.
I'm a progressive person, and what happens when I have a child is that I'm coming into it with a belief system, right? And that belief system is something that your guests and that I would refer to as gender ideology. Where this belief system came from, I think when I think back to it, is really as a young person, being very idealistic, being involved with a lot of social justice activism, but also struggling to understand like how the world works and how I can make a positive impact in it. And along comes in my early 20s an answer, a really simple, Francis, I watched your Joe Rogan interview, you talk about be cautious of simple solutions to complex problems. Well, wow, does that resonate with me? Because I was offered a very simple thing, and that was a formula for understanding the root of our problems and social ills that could really be boiled down to these systems of white supremacy, of capitalism, of patriarchy. That's what I was given. This is a couple decades ago. There were other ones that were added since, but that's where it was then. And that simple formula for understanding them and analyzing our world could be broken down to these categories of oppressed and oppressor. And what needed to happen to make the world a better place was to really uproot all of this. So we could, like you all have spoken to, create somewhat of a utopia. I didn't call it.
See, this is what I'm talking about. BLM, LGBT organization, not the community, the organization. Feminism, communism, wokeism, all these things that are destroying our country. They have, she says that, I wanted to be a social warrior so that I can make a utopian world. What she doesn't tell you during this entire video is that that ideology says also that there's a first step, and you can never get to that second step of creating a utopia unless you do the first step. And the first step says we need to destroy every aspect of society, all the way down to the way you think and talk. And then, and only then, can we build back better with a more fair communist or matriarchy, society, depending on if you're a feminist or just pure communist. All these, that's how they get you, on the next thing and the next thing, feminism to communism, all blah, 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 because they're all the same thing. They all have the same core belief that society is intertwined so much with this oppression, whether it be patriarchal or transphobia or whatever, you know what I mean, racism, it is so intertwined in every aspect of the way, your society functions, all the way down to the way they think and they talk. So you need to destroy everything. See, that's what a social warrior is. They say that they're someone that's there to make the world great and make a utopia, but they don't tell you how they're going to do it. A social warrior is someone who believes that they need it's their duty. It's not just that something they should do. No. It's your duty as a human to destroy everything in your society, all the way down to the way people speak. Because you could never have a utopia unless you do that. See, she won't tell you that part.
Then a few years ago, I didn't use that word, but now I can see it as that was really what I was striving to be a part of. And I'm going to come back to this later in the story, but I think that was really the formula and the belief system that for me led me to believe as a mother and as a parent that my child or my children could have an innate transgender identity.
Can you believe this crap? Now, what? A transgender kid might be what? 1 out of 100,000? Okay? That's the same odds as maybe getting cancer, right? Imagine me, my kid, 1 out of 100,000 kids have cancer, so I'm going to have everything my kid, everything in his life has to revolve around cancer. And I need to tell him all the time that you could have cancer. Every second of his life when he's growing up as a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, I got to tell him about cancer and all the things. You might have to walk around with a bag that you crap into or piss into, and all that. You'll be sick all the time, and you might lose your hair, and and I tell my kid this all the time. And my whole reasoning is because I need to prepare. I have to be a good parent to prepare my child for this 1 in 100,000 chance of happening to him. And I have to revolve everything that kid knows and thinks, and everything has to revolve around having cancer. And him knowing that he has a good chance of getting cancer, I never really tell the kid that it's only 1 out of 100,000 kids. I tell them, no, he has a good chance of it happening. Because that makes sense. You know what I mean? If it's a 1 in 100,000 chance, hey, everything should revolve around that, right? Because that all makes sense.
So when you have that formula of, people of color, white people, men, women, as the years went by and I was very involved in the social justice movement, transgender, cisgender, it slotted right into that formula. And so I don't, I know after I wrote the piece, a lot of people like, where did this come from? Where does this come from? And that, I think, played a significant role in where it came from for me, that I didn't do a lot of questioning of it. It just kind of slotted right in to that bigger ideology. And so my partner and I, from the best intentions imaginable, thought, if we're having children, we want to acknowledge and we want to be very proactive that they could possibly be born male, but have this gender identity that was different, that was a girl. And no matter what, we wanted to make sure that our parenting was going to support that. So I think this is a key point that I want to speak to throughout the interview, is that when you are in this belief system, you truly believe in this existence of an innate transgender identity. You believe
I believe in cancer, kids having cancer. But because it's only a 1 in 100,000 or whatever the odds are of them having it, I'm not going to revolve everything about my kid upbringing, tell them about cancer all day long because of it. Because that's insane, okay? Just like trans kids. Just because 1 in 100,000 might be trans, I'm not going to have my kid entire life revolve around trans kids because he might be trans. He might have cancer too. Did this woman ever think maybe she's a bad parent because she isn't shoving cancer crap down her kid's throat too? Because he might have cancer, and he should be prepared in case he gets this 1 in 100,000 thing happen to him, like he's trans or cancer. You got to prepare him. Yeah, this all makes sense. This all makes perfect sense.
Believe in that. Or many of us do. And so that's going to make the difference in these debates and these conversations around what you do with children who have gender dysphoria. So for us, it was almost like if we can be gender neutral, if we can be more open and flexible.
Let me ask you this. Gender dysphoria means that you're confused about your gender. You're all over the place, right? So how do you combat this? I mean, how do you make a child, how do you force them to be transgendered? Basically, being transgendered or having gender dysphoria means you're just confused about your gender, right? That's all it means, literally. That's literally the definition. So how do you make a kid confused about his gender? Maybe you bring up 100 million genders that don't even really exist. They just denote, personality traits or what stereotype. Like if you could have a spectrum of the stereotypical things that men and women do, then yeah, you're somewhere on that spectrum. You have a different gender. But it is meaningless compared to your biology. It's just talking about your personality. You're not actually a different gender. You're not actually a different species because you're not male or female. You're still male or you're still female. Okay?
Flexible, we could maybe avoid a transgender child ever having gender dysphoria. I don't know if that makes sense or not. It might sound kind of crazy, but
yeah, of course it's crazy because if you're trying to not have your kid not be confused about gender, you don't introduce 100 genders to them at 5 years old, because that will do what? What will that do? If a kid can't barely walk and talk, he just learned that, and you're going to bring up 100 genders, you don't think that's going to confuse him? What is the definition of gender dysphoria? Oh, you're confused about your gender. Oh, sounds like this woman is creating gender dysphoria in her child.
But that's kind of where we were coming from, and I was coming from, was really wanting to not do harm to my child. It was kind of the opposite.
Yeah, I didn't want my child to be unprepared in case he gets cancer. I mean, 1 in 100,000 kids have cancer. So obviously, to be a good parent, I have to make sure that he's totally prepared to have cancer. And he needs to know that he might have cancer, and he needs to know every fact there is to know about cancers at 4 years old. We got to bring in the doctor books. The people that only have 8-year degrees can understand these books, but we got to bring them in and let the 4-year-old read it to him so that he understands. Because that's 4-year-olds are smart like that. Yeah. They can barely walk and talk, but yeah, they just learned that. But yeah, if you're a parent and you don't realize 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds are total moron idiots, you need your kids taken off of you. You are a poor-ass parent if you're that stupid that you think that your 4 or 6-year-old is not an idiot. They just learned how to walk and talk. Obviously, they're idiots. They can't even spell their name.
Of what many of us now see as something that does do harm.
So the thing that I've always found very interesting about your story, Rose, I mean, the story is fascinating as a whole, but you say that 20 years ago you got into this ideology. 20 years ago, because to me this is something fairly new. I first came across these ways of thinking in 2016. So how did you encounter it 20 years ago?
Well, just speaking to what I did already, I was in college, I was idealistic, I was an activist, and it was really, it was within that world that what you all would call woke ideology was starting to take root.